Well, hello, everybody. There's yet another episode of NanaTalks podcast, but this time we're trying slightly different format. This time it's going to be a roundtable, and today three amazing folks joining me: Mark Hollingshead, Paul Mara, and Ken Erdelt. I'm going to give a minute for each and every of my guests to present themselves, and essentially what we are planning to do, we're planning just to talk about what's happening around us and share our opinions, our takes on every topic. And I really hope that you're going to enjoy and like it. In case it's yes, please do not forget to comment, show us that this is the format you're supporting, and therefore we would know that the next time we should continue to use this exactly format. So, Ken, please share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my background is I had 9 years in the Air Force as kind of right out of school. After that, I went into the corporate environment where I had 35 years of experience working with larger companies and in high impact roles, so IT, customer service, that sort of stuff, and transformational activities where we brought together and merged operations and IT work into one solution. So I had about 35 years in that. That also included a stint at Ernst & Young with consulting. And the last segment of my corporate life, I was the Senior VP of Operations, and then for a period of time, the Senior VP of IT for a large dental carrier. And during that time, we merged operations between a government entity and a commercial focused entity into a common operating model. And that was a huge transformational cultural change for that organization. We did that in about 4.5 years and grew membership from about 10 million members to about 25 million members in that time frame. So it was classic changing the engines on a jet plane while you're mid-flight. So that was that. And about 9 years ago, when I left my corporate roles, I began working with business owners as a business coach and an executive coach. And so I've been doing that for the last 9 years. And the last 4 or 5 of those have been to be working with Mark and Paul in the Delta Point Partners realm, working primarily with veteran-owned businesses to help them gain access to and leverage the opportunities that exist with large corporations. And so that's been where we've been focused a lot. One of the things that I'll close with is that shifting my focus a bit to be more focused on the business owners that are planning to exit their business. The SBA says there's about 350,000 baby boomers a year that are leaving their business, but sadly only about 30% actually get a sale. And a lot of that has to do with their ability to be prepared for their exit. And so I'm really trying to take a proactive approach with that part of the market to try to help them be better prepared to go into the exit plan itself. So that's kind of my story.
Awesome. Paul?
Yes, thanks, Yarna, for the opportunity to be on your podcast. We really appreciate it. So I'm like Ken, I'm a military veteran. I served in the Army, and I was a military police investigator because the grand plan at the time was law enforcement. Got out, got my bachelor's degree in law enforcement, and got hired by 2 brothers who were starting a private investigative agency. I was their first employee. And from there, I began a long career starting, operating, funding, and selling small businesses. So after doing that for about 30 some years and really understanding and appreciating how difficult it is to create a business out of nothing and make it successful where somebody buys it, but also if a business doesn't go so well, how devastating that can be personally, financially, relationships, all that. So I decided to pivot from being a small business owner to being a small business consultant. So I bought into a business coaching franchise that Ken and I are part of called AdvoCoach, which then gave me access to great tools and resources I didn't have and wish I had had all the many years I was running a business. So as I launched that new career, I discovered this thing called private sector supplier diversity. I discovered that military veterans were a diverse business group, in fact, the last entrant into supplier diversity, and that it was a brand new opportunity for military veteran-owned businesses that we had never had before, estimated at about $120 billion a year. So light bulb moment, this is where I'm meant to be. So that began the process of building out a national business coaching practice, partnered with Mark early on, and decided to bring all of our capabilities and skills under one umbrella so that we could be a fractional outsourced C-suite with our 200 to 300 years of business experience, but also a fully stocked digital marketing team to help develop new prospects for our clients, both in the corporate world, but beyond. Teaming opportunities with fellow veterans, other companies, and just really there to help them grow their business and then develop business prospects that they don't have the time, tools, talent, or money to do. And that's it.
Mark.
Yes, thanks, Yarna, for having us on your podcast today. My name is Mark Hollingshead, owner of an organization called Delta Point Partners. I've worked in the corporate space right out of college. My degree was actually in hotel restaurant management. I'm actually the only non-veteran, non-diverse professional on our team, but my dad was a Marine, so I kind of operate like a Marine and very structured like a Marine might be structured. And I started right out of college working for a major hotel chain in Hyatt Regency in operations. Before I pivoted to a company called Marriott, another great hotel in food and beverage, for several years, almost 7 or 8 years, working a lot of hours, a lot of weekends, and decided at 27 to take an entry-level position with a company called Paychex, which is a $3 billion outsourced payroll and HR company. Started in entry level and worked one level below where a VP might be, having the privilege to work with salespeople, sales managers, all in the Northeast and supporting them. Before I pivoted to vice president of small business banking for Bank of America in New York State, considered upstate New York, not New York City. I did that job for quite a while and learned a ton. It's actually where Delta Point Partners, the concept of Delta Point Partners was actually formed. Before I worked to help 3 IT companies pivot and scale and grow, before I honestly had the guts to jump into doing what I do now, in conjunction with my relationships with Paul, Ken, a gentleman by the name of John Stacy, Christy, who's our digital marketing team. And what we really did is bring a team of executive level positions together for the greater good of small to mid-sized companies, just to leverage our background and experience in whatever way they see fit to continue to help them scale and grow. Paul and I, we've been together we're going on 8 years now. We've talked to hundreds of businesses, both small, mid-size, and fairly large, probably 40 million, listening to their real issues and then working to see how we can help them solve some of the real issues. So I look forward to the conversation today.
Right, this is great. So we have the coach, private investigator, or detective. Oh my God, I didn't know that about you, Paul. And now I'm a little bit nervous, curious, but nervous a little bit.
Oh, that was long ago.
Well, still, right? The skill is still there. I'm pretty sure of it. And the banker. So there you go. I just got back yesterday in the middle of the night almost from one of the biggest world conferences connected to the money world, Money 2020. There was tons of banks represented over there, both huge and community banks, credit unions, fintechs, essentially everything and anything you can think of. The financial world was over there. Even a couple of robots from Boston Dynamics went through the expo hall, and they were represented some of the banks. So that was huge. And the biggest topic everybody were talking about was AI, the rise of AI, the impact of AI on the every sphere of the economy, and everybody was talking if we're going to see the next essentially leap in our productivity, if that's going to be the next revolution or not necessarily. And I really would love to get your take on that, because when the banks, one of the most conservative industries, starting to talk about AI and the influence of AI on the economy, that means that the small businesses will definitely feel that influence. So what do you hear like around you? What are your take on that, Mark? Let's start from their perspective.
Let me start well, we use AI tools as an organization collaboratively. I think we walk cautiously as an organization of how to use all of the AI tools that are at your fingertips, because there is a cost to implementing AI and rollout. I think it will, and again, this is my opinion from us using it for our clients. I think we walk cautiously, right? I think a lot of people that are investigating the use of AI is, what is the real cost to set it up? How is it going to impact our bottom line, right? How is it going to impact our culture in a positive way? So I think there's a lot of things that companies are looking at. There's no doubt it can help an organization, but what's the real cost to implementing it and continuing to use it? How does it affect our labor force, our skill sets? So I think there's a lot, and we walk cautiously because I think at some point there's going to be oversight on the use of it and how it's used, right? And guidelines to how to use it, because I don't think that there's real guidelines to how it's used. And I think that, in my opinion, can be misused if not used in the right format or how it's intended to be used. So I think we walk cautiously on it, keep our eyes open. We use it in a way that could be very effective for our clients, right? That aren't investing in it yet. And maybe because we use it, that they're seeing how we use it, right? And may leverage our background and experience to help them put things into place, which is a possibility. So I think overall, it could be a good long-term impact for an organization if it's used in the right way, and it's used in a way that is fiscally responsible for small businesses and large businesses, because the cost of implementing it, has to be part of the factor of building out a current or a future budget.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is that you not necessarily always can say for sure what's the cost going to be. It is very hard to right here, right now, to calculate it. Like, if you would take a look on your, I don't know, financial projections or something like that, it is quite complicated to add any projections at the moment, especially if you are using any service providers, like, for example, OpenAI, right? The most popular one, ChatGPT. You cannot say for sure what's going to be their policy even half a year from now, and they will increase prices for sure because they've turned into for-profit organization, and we do know that their expenses are much higher currently still than their gains, and therefore, again, taking into account that they've switched the nature of their business from nonprofit to for-profit, they're going to need to get to the break-even point and then to the point of profitability. And that means that most probably the prices will be increased. And you cannot say by essentially what a percentage comparing to the current prices.
Not to step on anybody's toes, but I just want to speak to something you said, like, figuring out what the true costs are. I think there are some baselines that when you look to implement, you have to start thinking about things like, what's the infrastructure cost? What's the data acquisition and management cost? What's the cost of software development and customization to our organization, right? What's the implementation, integration, and rollout cost? Licenses and subscription fees, right? What is the cost of training somebody to be able to use the tools the right way and that expertise? The maintenance and monitoring, the ethics and compliance and security. I think you can build out a framework to a budget to AI and then really work backwards from there based on the criteria of things that you should look at. I think you can develop something, right? Most people probably small businesses might be using, open AI sources like ChatGPT and paying a subscription fee and learning how to use the tool. That's minimal, right, for a small company. And then obviously you can add on, services, You start small, learn how to use it, and build it into phases. I think you can build out what an estimated cost could be for a small business, because we know ours. I know mine, right? And I think that, people like our organization can help small businesses learn how to use it, right? Learn how to develop a budget, because, people like Ken on this call that's helped develop budgets and the tools that he has. I think we can help build that out into an accounting system to start giving some basic idea of costs and planning for the future. I don't know what Ken or Paul thinks.
So I had an opportunity this week to sit in on a conference that was held in downtown Boston, and it was hosted by the Mass Technology Leadership Council. And we had a number of companies present their view of what's going to happen for 2025 and beyond, right? So I'll share some of those thoughts, because I think Mark is right. There's a lot of unknowns right now. And so people are approaching it cautiously. But there's a lot of prototyping, a lot of experimentation going on, because they do need to understand what's the dynamics involved with this. And really thinking about it holistically, not just at a point of time or a point of departure, but, what's the overall end point? No one is expecting large-scale production solutions in 2025, and it's because of the complexity. There's millions and millions of data points, and I had one chart that I saw that over 90% of the data is unstructured. And so when you have unstructured data, you have to, if you're going to be able to use it, which AI is really good at, but you still have to educate it on what that unstructured data looks like, right? However, the early returns that people are seeing are very hopeful. Forrester did a survey of the folks who are doing AI projects. I'm sorry, I'm having a look at my notes here, but they surveyed customers, and what people were seeing was like a 28% faster revenue growth when they were using AI in their sales process, 33% higher profit growth when they were using it to help streamline operations, and 43% better customer retention, because customers can get answers more quickly. And so if you think about a customer interaction, and you call up, and if you can actually get to a person, that's amazing these days. It's very hard to get to people, but if you think about it, they oftentimes have to take time on the call to research whatever issue you're calling about, because they don't have the answers off the top. But if they can use AI tools, or the person calling in can use an AI tool to state their question, it speeds that whole process up tremendously, because you're not searching, the individual's not searching reams and reams of data that way.
It'd be interesting, and here's the examples I always give, like Microsoft. You can never reach anybody at Microsoft. You can never reach anybody at Apple. It's always type in your question and boom, it gives you your answer. It's almost like it's a self-service, right? But it does save organizations like that money. But I also look at, I think you have to be careful with customer service today, right? I
That
think
was
you got to
my
be very
question.
careful with that, right?
Like,
so I look
Microsoft and Apple can allow themselves, to not care about that hardly about customers and retention of the customers. But if you're a small business and no one will ever be able to get to you because your customer support is only chatbots, I would wonder to see, what going to be the numbers and what's going to be the customer retention rates in that case.
So I worked with a company that had that used an HR system for small businesses, that they can go in and ask a question, right? They state the problem, and then they would have something that would respond to them the answer to how to handle that HR issue. And when you look at the issue and the response is right. But what I also learned is attorneys, right, would look at that and go, I'm not sure I would respond that way, right? Because it's not a broad stroke, right? There's not a broad stroke to an answer, because you have to really listen to the problem when it comes to certain things. So I have used it in that capacity of HR, and it was very convenient. But you always wondered, like, was the employer asking the right question, or were they framing the question from an emotional way, right? Because most of the time when there's an HR problem, there's an emotional part of it, right? So I think you do have to walk cautiously with the tools, but as Ken said, can be very beneficial.
Yeah, 43% of growth, it's impressive numbers.
Yeah.
And I would wonder, like, Ken, do you have any like numbers, if that's the growth, like the revenue growth or the profit growth? I would wonder, like, if they also count into the statistics all the expenses connected to the AI implementation, or no.
Yeah, I really don't have that level of detail. What the survey said was that the firms reported more rapid revenue growth, more rapid profit growth, and higher customer service satisfaction. Now, I don't know who the companies were that were surveyed, or, if they counted for all the costs and what they were doing. And I think it's just the matter of time, because what people are expecting is that this is going to continue to be invested in, because it's potentially too powerful not to. And it has too much opportunity. At the same time, the more experience an AI gets in different settings, the better it becomes, right? I mean, because it does learn.
Absolutely. And again, the data sets, as you mentioned, essentially AI currently operating to use the statistic again you brought, right? Only based on 10% of structured data sets and databases out of everything we do have available. So I could imagine that the more we're gonna structure available data and data sets, the more AI will become powerful in different spheres and topics. But then that's going to bring us to the topic I also shared with you, right, at the again, the conference which happened at the same time as the Money 2020 TechCrunch Disrupt, one of the two biggest technological conferences in the world. There was a huge banner claiming stop hiring humans and proposing to replace humans with AI chatbots. And this is very interesting topic. I do not think that in the nearest future we'll be able to fully replace humans, but once again, like, what's going to be the level and what we're going to see in the nearest time, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, Mark said something pretty important a while ago, and I hate to admit it that he did that, but yes, he made some comment earlier that there's nuance in the answer. There's nuance in the information. ChatGPT is much more effectively at pulling forward information much faster than someone trying to research it in manuals or online. But ultimately, still, at this point, there's this idea that you take that and you actually have to own, is it the right answer? Is there a better answer? Is it pieces of that go into an answer? It's just that you get the information to help you formulate that answer a lot quicker. But I don't believe in the immediate future that we're going to just replace humans. There may be some functions that can be replaced. It could do mechanically or technically specified functions pretty well. But when it comes into interpreting diagnostics or people's emotions or other kinds of things, that becomes a little different. However, there was another article I read recently in Discover magazine that they're actually able to start thinking about a machine reading your thoughts and being able to help people who aren't able to talk be able to create words and so on and so forth. And to me, that's the one where you get into, where's that fine line on, how much you can interpret. But they're doing it. It's already being demonstrated. So I think AI is in its, to some degree, in its infancy, even though it's been around quite a while. It's still, at this point, the level of adoption is at its infancy, and people are all looking at it and trying to figure out what it means to them and in which areas they can use it.
I'll just say how we use it, Irna. People who adopt it as, say, a small business owner adopts AI tools. I don't think you can take the answers as gospel. Okay. And I think that there's some that will take it as gospel. When we use AI tools to do research, we leverage our background and experience to look at the information that was produced. And we say, well, yeah, that's true, but there's more to it. Right. And we add the more to it. Right. For those who just take it as gospel and just regurgitate what comes back to you, I think that's dangerous. Right. We're very cautious when we do research for our clients. And if Ken looks at something that we use our AI tools, or Paul, they're 30 years in doing what they're doing. Ken will say to me, yeah, this is good, but there's always a little but, right? Because he's referencing his background and experience, that, like he said, the nuances. Same with Paul, specifically sales and marketing. There's a lot of great information that gives you good data and intelligence. But before we spit stuff out as information, Paul's eyes on it, Ken's eyes are on it, my eyes are on it, our digital team's eyes are on it. We all have input into either strengthening the information, right? Because of our background. We still collaborate on it, but it does it quickly for you. Like quickly.
So it's
that's
like
the
drafting,
time saver.
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the time savers. It produces information quickly, but you still have to analyze it.
Yeah,
right? You still have to validate. Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I'll give you a real example of that. As I was doing some research, and I mentioned my focus is around people who are nearing that point where they're thinking about what they're going to do with their business to sell it or exit it in some form or fashion. One of the big things that in the literature is how difficult it is for an owner to let go of a business. But when I ran my query through the AI tool, it actually didn't mention that as one of the obstacles in in how to prepare someone. It was all more about the things that needed to be done. It was some cultural things with teams and all that, but failed to pick up on what I think was one of the most important pieces of it is how do you condition an owner to get ready to sell their business? Because businesses are like their babies. And if they've been in it for 30 or 40 years or even shorter, but it's hard for them to let go. So anyway, the whole point is that that's an element that I didn't think got picked up properly in the analysis, and one that I had to add into it separately.
So essentially, it's only business, right? So no, the emotional aspect isn't over there, and that's why I was super surprised to hear about the HR related AI. Doesn't really matter, a tool or whatever, which talks to people in a way, because mostly, as you, Mark, mentioned, work of HR department going to be connected with the human emotions and possibility to share them, to say at least, and then react anyhow on the emotions. Not sure if AI is the proper tooling over there, but to moving a little bit forward in the topic, yet another very highlighted question during the conference, the Money 2020 conference, was not necessarily or only the how the AI gonna benefit or how we will benefit using AI in our profits or margins or whatever, but also the risk of the fraud and that it's becoming more and more complicated to do the fraud detection, and therefore more and more compliance practices, tooling, policies has to be added. So I would wonder, Paul, what's your take on that, since you're the one, again, private investigator. Oh my God, I love it. So I wonder, what's your take on that?
So on the AI piece, I just have a high level understanding. We use it for content development. I heard all the arguments, everything. It's gonna, the robots are gonna kill us and all that stuff and take over all that. But so I don't have you guys, especially with what you've been through, have a lot more insight into it than I do. because I simply don't use it other than what we do for ours. There's some concerns with some of the things that are expressed. I mean, reading your thoughts to your line, when do you cross that over? Because if all of us had a thought bubble over our head, when we're at meetings or meeting people, we'd all have black eyes and all that stuff. So that's a little concerning. So I don't have much anything else really to offer in that regard.
There was a segment of the discussion that I attended that, it was about predictions for 2025, and part of it was a lot of increased investment by companies trying to see how they could use it. There's expectations, as we were just talking about, that there is going to be some sort of compliance, risk assessments and so on and so forth that are going to be coming forth. The government is everybody expects the government to add more regulations, just like they've done around cybersecurity and everything else. Is that there's a risk that, if nothing else, it's an emotional risk, but we know that it's more than that right now. But there's still a risk associated with how people use it, what they may have to inform their people, the people they're giving information to say, AI makes mistakes. I've actually seen that on some of the things that I've worked with, is that phrase is actually used. Please review carefully. AI can make mistakes.
Absolutely. But like when we were talking about fraud risks and compliance risks, that's not solely about mistakes. I don't know if you have seen that, but I've seen a couple of the AI models which can essentially generate your voice. You're sharing with them, as in Mission Impossible, when I was just a little girl, I've seen that movie, right? When you're essentially providing some amount of text, you're reading it using your own voice, and now the model can replicate your voice to a significant level where the other AI cannot say the difference. Therefore, these guardrails cannot say the difference. So if that means that you would never know who picked up the phone, like when the bank robot gonna call and ask, like, can you please confirm this and that, like transaction or whatever, the robot will not be able to say the difference, whether that was you who said, yes, yes, that's me, or that's going to be essentially another robot using your voice, right? So this whole deep fake industry, which can replace your voice, your essentially everything connected to your appearance, not personality, but to your appearance, right? It can be easily replicated to a significant level, or at least, let's put it that way, to the level where another robot cannot say the difference.
It's a very deep problem what you're talking about right now, Yerna, because of all the data breaches, right? The people that are committing the fraud have stolen people's information, right? People's information has been stolen, right? In the healthcare industry, you go do data breaches, millions and millions of people's data has been stolen, right? I don't have a real good answer of how you protect me who gets a phone call that's AI generated, right? Other than there's so much replication today. It's really hard to be vigilant, whether it's through email, phone calls. I even see mailers now coming out, right? I think that's going to be a very hard problem for them to solve, right now. Telephone companies have to have more regulation of what's allowed to go through on your cell phone and where does it come from. So it's a big problem that's going to take a while to solve. It's deep.
I was thinking about that earlier today because I was working on getting some information together, and there was this part of it was have a new application, and there was the two-factor authentication. And we now know that, some forms of two-factor authentication aren't as secure as others. So rather than getting a text message, it was an emphasis to get a pass key or something else. And my thinking is that there's going to be something like that. And even when you're using AI or communicating it, that there's going to be a challenge question somewhere to sort of prove you are who you are. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm seeing it in some of the other stuff already.
It's a bigger problem because it's affecting our kids, right? People don't think, we think about the difficulties for us. Think about teenage kids or younger generations that leverage technology. I think that there's going to have to be restrictions to how AI is used at all levels. Think about kids that are using free ChatGPT for college, right? Teachers now have to learn how to recognize, papers, right? The wording, right? So I think there has to be restrictions. There has to be compliance dialed down on a grand scale.
Or that's our chance. I'm don't get me wrong. I'm all hands up for the restrictions and regulations if they're going to be the good ones, not the regulation for the sake of regulation. But maybe that's our chance to revisit our education system in overall, especially when we're talking about younger generation, because we clearly can see that even now what we are sharing with our children at the school are not necessarily the best way to provide them some knowledge, right? And maybe we need to revisit our ideas of the education in general. And I was always, leaning more toward the idea that we need to teach our children how to think, not to memorize and then repeat something, but rather develop critical thinking, develop the possibility to obtain needed information and analyze that, and based on that make some decisions or whatever, rather than again just memorize something and just replicating it. Because it seems to me, and you're absolutely right here, Mark, with the rise of AI, it's not a big problem to create anything.
I'm not.
Well,
Go ahead, Ken.
that,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead,
Just
Ken.
to quickly add to what you were saying, we know that there's bias in the AI answers a lot of times, and they're working hard to try to remove that. But if you were an unscrupulous actor, potentially you could create some bias points just by what you contribute to the conversation. So it is an area. It's deeper than just a security code, and I know I just said that a while ago, but it's deeper than that. It's how do you regulate what comes out as knowledge?
I'm not a fan of big of a ton of government regulations in government's hands in every cookie jar. I am a fan of regulations if what's being produced is going to be very dangerous and harmful, right? AI misused can be very dangerous and harmful at all levels if misused. I just think about my kids getting a robocall from AI and it sounds like her friend. And my daughter can't decipher if it's real or not, right? Because kids think everything's real. Adults think everything's real. That's why you see what's going on right now in our election play out the way it's out. Everybody believes it's real, but nobody digs into the facts, right? That's marketing, right? Because our trust levels, right, are high amongst certain things. So I am a fan of tools like an AI before you just roll it out and give it away for free. Really think about how could people misuse this, right? And yeah, maybe it's a small population that will misuse it, but the cost to the misuse is astronomical from a financial, mental, right? It's astronomical. And I think for me, when you have really good tools that could be beneficial, think through before allowing companies just to roll something out. I'm all in for free, building businesses for free, but if something's going to be dangerous, I think there needs to be a little bit more, I don't know if the word's oversight, but investigation into how could this hurt us, right? You're smiling, Ken.
I'm not sure if we
I'm
will
just
be
thinking
able.
of one of my favorite quotes from the movies is, "With great power comes great responsibility."
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know that you can regulate great responsibility very well.
I know it's hard.
Yeah.
But that's what, and so I think about some things that have happened in my life with fraud and fake, and how it's impacted my family, right? Because everybody's got a story. It's probably until you are the victim of it, right? And I don't have a victim mentality. I always like, how could this been prevented, right? Can it be prevented? And I always say that there's probably more that could have been done, right? But what is that more without crossing the line of freedom and rights and so forth?
This is very interesting questions, to say at least, right? And again, with the rising of AI, even a year ago, I got a lot of these feelings and questions regarding if AI gonna replace everybody, what's gonna be next, right? And I just had the lunch with the incredibly smart woman. Her husband worked. That's important word here. He worked at the nonprofit, at the law department, and he had been replaced with the AI tool. He got fired. And just today, 4 5 hours ago, the latest report of the U.S. non-farm payrolls went out, and we can see that the numbers are significantly below the forecast, where the forecast was 106K, and the actual numbers is only 12K. So I would tend to believe that some reasoning behind this, I don't know, this a little bit even panic, I'd say, mode. There are something, but whether it is, two independent factors moving simultaneously, I mean, raise of AI and maybe some replacement, and then the fact that the economy is not in the best place, and therefore there is this declining in the labor market, or they are somehow connected.
So I had an anecdotal story. I don't have a validation on this, but I heard from some folks that a company that had, had a number of open positions for coding, for software development, cut that number drastically because they're going to go to AI to do it. So to your point, I don't know that we have the data yet, but anecdotally, you're starting to hear where people are making that choice. You just don't. I'll go back to the banner. I just don't think it's an absolute, but I think it's going to impact resourcing in some context.
Might that be the reason why we have, if we're gonna see the labor market in overall, the decline isn't that big, but when we're talking about solely non-farming labor market, the decline is just dramatic.
Well, I think the labor market's very tough, by the way, in general. And you hear it on the business side saying they can't find enough people, but you also hear it on the resources side that say they're not getting callbacks. People coming out of college aren't able to get jobs. And now the next, and then there's the next layer of that comes out with the next graduation point, where people are having difficulty getting jobs in the market. And part of this goes to, I think, something we talked about before is there, and I know we don't probably have time to get into it today, but is there something of a cautious nature in the job market today where people have a high degree of uncertainty about what's going on? And there was a Forbes article this morning that I picked up on that the company or a what's it called, National Federation of Independent Businesses surveys small businesses for their how comfortable they are or how uncertain things are. And the recent survey had the largest highest level of uncertainty among small business ever recorded. And so when you have a lot of uncertainty, people don't make decisions to hire. I mean, that fall, so it's a double-edged sword out there right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, you wanted to add something.
I'm going back to your question: is AI going to replace people long term? I kind of have two answers to the question, and it's strictly my opinion. I don't have any data or facts. It's just, we sit and talk about these things all the time as a group just for fun. I think AI is going to replace people at some level, because if I look at the generations, right, I do think there's generational things where I just look at my son and daughter. My son's 18. I know what he doesn't want to do. And I'm like, how did you come up with that? Right? How did you come to that analysis? Right? That you don't want to do those things. And I think I talk about this all the time. My wife, parenting's harder than ever today, because there's so many people around them through social media channels that are inspiring my kids to think differently than my wife and I might think. It's a constant battle, right? That because we're old school, you go to college, you get a degree, whether it's online or you go somewhere, right? Profession, career. But you see people today that say, I can sit home and make $50,000 a year on social media doing influencer stuff. And I can just work whenever I want, right? And I think what happens is that people start to think that everybody could do that, right? Think about all the podcasters today. Why do people do podcasts? Why are more and more people doing podcasts? For views. What happens when you get a lot of views? All of a sudden you become an influencer, right? And there's money to be made as an influencer, right? And I'm amazed at the people that are influencers doing videos that make no sense to me on TikTok. Like, I have to watch TikTok. I have to watch social channels, because those are ways that people are building their businesses, certain industries, right?
There are
And
essentially numbers which can, because I've heard about that, or I've read somewhere, it doesn't really matter, but I just like essentially Googled that because I remembered that there was numbers, which can essentially double down on what you mentioned. So according to The Economist, 57% of Gen Z in America would like to be social media influencers.
I'm going to share this
That's
with
the
you.
profession, they are seeing that they would love to build up.
So my daughter, this is real life, is 16. There's a young gentleman in school that does TikTok videos. Okay, 16. I've seen his videos. They make no sense to me. As an adult, they make no sense to me. He's got 1.2 million followers. Guess how much money this young man makes a year on 1.2 million followers? He's 16. He's told my daughter, I'll never take a real job ever again. So if this is where these new younger generations are being groomed, yes, I do believe that AI is going to replace something, because people aren't wanting to do certain jobs anymore.
Yes, but there are also a lot of spheres where, like, whether you like it or not, you cannot be that easily replaced, right? Because of, and then going to be the whole set of stuff and things.
So,
but it seems to me, on the other hand, especially when we're talking about TikTok, right? To not be replaced by AI, because essentially in the nearest future, it can be, your face can be again replicated, your voice can be replicated. That means that you're going to need to do more crazy stuff, which only crazy people can think of, because AI wouldn't be even like ready or think about something like that. They wouldn't be, how to say that, like, do you remember Ken mentioned that AI didn't take into account the need of, like, preparing the owner of the business. AI didn't take into account the emotional aspect, right? Therefore AI most probably will not be able to, I don't know, create some crazy video like filming how you're just falling out of the tree for the sake of like just views, to show your real scary face or something like that. And therefore they're going to be the higher demand for the real emotions. And that means that more crazy stuff, like on the age stuff, will be out there. And my question would be, at what moment of a time the pendulum will swing, to the other direction, and what going to be that direction of the demand of real human interaction and real human emotions?
I think that's going to be on the demographic of the buyer, right? You're a corporate company, and if you have a diverse portfolio of clients, let's just say the cell phone industry. My kids all the time will tell us, I don't need to go to the store, right? And I think I think that's where AI will play a major role long term. Is who buys what we sell, and how do those tools play a role, right? Because we talk about this all the time on our team. You have to think about your future prospects. You got to think about your future clients. We talk about this in the pizza business, right? The client that owns a pizzeria. 70% of the people that place the order for pizza are females. 70% are moms or the females that place the orders, not males. So then you have to think about, well, how do we communicate our specials and stuff to the moms or the people that are placing those orders? How do they like to be communicated to, right? What's the method of that communication? And how do I reach those people? Because in the food service industry, right, my pizzeria, I always tell them, I said, it's not other pizzerias, it's not restaurants, it's the gas station that sells the pizza. Because people are on the go and they want convenience. So when I go to the gas station, if I'm hungry or my kids are hungry, I'll grab a slice of pizza from there just because it's convenient. So you're selling against convenience, right? So every industry has to look at who is their competition and how can we be different.
Yeah, but
right?
also
and I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is how can we be different? We talk about it all the time as a team, right? Because there is no quick fix.
But also,
I don't know what Ken or Paul think about that.
That's a great question. And like what I wanted to add or double down on what you just mentioned is the fact that, like, because of the rise of this like influencers economy, let's put it that way, right? The whole structure of the age groups which has the influence on our business has started to change, because as you mentioned, right, he's 16 and he makes money, and therefore he already entered the consumer market, and therefore the folks who are only 16 already started to have that influence on the services and products we are producing. So we really need to think about how we're going to tailor our proposals toward the absolutely different target audience, which is used to be.
Yeah, there's definitely a generational divide between when you get into communication, where the Gen X's and Gen Z's don't pick up a book. They, to get them to actually look in a book is really tough a lot of time. And so they're communicating purely on their phones, almost exclusively, and not text. It's all chat of one form or another. And so how do you get through to them if you have a message to deliver? If they're the market that you're going after for something, you have, as Mark has said, you have to line up not only your messaging, but your media on which you deliver that message to that audience. So when we think about our audience could be 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60-year-olds. There could be people that we're trying to reach in all those age groups. So when we send out a message, an email, it's very likely that some section of that it's going to miss, because that's not the media they're looking for. And so that's going to be a challenge for reaching your target market, is understanding it and then being able to get to it.
I think the other thing too, and again, this is just all my opinion, and is we try to help companies navigate growth, is this, when we talk about sales cycles, right? People say, everybody wants to generate revenue, right? So when Ken did the thing that 20% revenue growth, I have a lot of questions about how did it generate 20% revenue growth. I want to know the how, right? To me, that's the most important part. It's easy to say 20, and this is not Ken, it's whatever the webinar, when somebody says the statistics say 20% revenue growth, I want to know how. Explain the how, right? Because if you know the how, then you're wondering, okay, how do we implement that? If they did it, how do we do it, right? Because obviously if AI increases revenue by reducing employee costs and labor costs, of course your revenue is going to go up, right? I don't think by 20% if you eliminated some people, right? But where I'm going with this is the more and more companies are taking a collaborative approach to choosing a supplier, right? People are not just changing services anymore. Think about your own buying habits, insurances or banking. You just don't change because somebody emailed you and gave you a better rate at something. You traditionally will maybe hold on to it for the end of the year and evaluate, but most people are, oh, it's 2%, 2 percentage points less on a credit card or whatever. You don't see people just jumping at that, right?
But was it the case ever? Like,
what's that?
Did people ever make that decisions just because, like, oh, 2% less? Yeah, let's change the supplier.
Way back in my day of selling, people would have no problem switching services if it was less expensive, because the conversion was easy. Now, when you want to change something, the process to convert to something else has become difficult. It's not as easy to change something like it used to be. You got document after document after document, right? You got to produce a lot to change something, depending on what it is, right? And people today don't have time to just change, so they wait, right? That's what I've seen. And that's why I say the sales cycle is longer than ever. I wish I could share a document. I actually saw this on LinkedIn today, and it has to do with different generations. The gentleman put together a really cool graphic on the different generations and how they think, act, and feel and make decisions in all aspect of work and life. It was pretty neat. I just saw it this morning. I haven't even sent it to Ken and Paul yet. But I think that's important to think about. How you might buy Yarna, it might be different than Ken and I, right? Because ages are different, right? I know my wife, she researches everything before she buys, right? Some just buy and say, I like it, I'm going to buy. So I think that's really important when it comes to planning and using AI tools, as Ken was mentioning earlier. I think that they can be effective in that.
But first of all, you need to understand who are your target audience.
That's
correct.
Yeah, like I said earlier, if you're dealing with baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Y, whatever, it all matters to the question that Mark was just posing, is how do you reach your target with the right media as well as messages? And AI can help you with some of that, because it can kind of pull in perspectives that might be helpful in that. Again, you have to use your judgment about what that really means for you as an individual or a company. But it can help you pull that together quickly. I think one of the things that I took away from the meeting, and we talked about it a little earlier, is data is the biggest issue. Is having how do you bring in the data to look at? And that's what the big companies are struggling. That's what they're wrestling with, because if it's non-structured, most of it is non-structured, if it's you've got data from different systems that might mean the same thing but be called different things, and you've got it's a huge mapping issue if you're trying to bring in data from a lot of different places and so on. And then, because if you don't bring in the right data, then you're not going to get the right answer, right? I mean, it's kind of
and that's how you can hit the biases, right? Because essentially you need to normalize somehow the data sets, but who's doing that? People, right? And you cannot say for sure that that the group of the people who worked on this specific data set didn't have some bias, they essentially leave their footprint of that bias on the data set. You're gonna later train your AI model using, right, this specific data set. And I think that you do remember that, well, scandal around the Gemini launch a couple months ago, right, when it appeared that the Gemini was super biased toward the woke culture. I don't know if you have seen those like news and messages around where so essentially the whole scandal around was the fact that after Gemini was launched, that's the AI produced by Google, people start to ask different questions based on race. Like, for example, if I'm white, what should I do? I don't know, white male, should I think that and this? And the Gemini addressed the question from the presumably white male as, don't be like, do not show your supremacy or whatever. But if you would say to the model that you are black female, it's going to be, yeah, go for it, etc. So the bias toward the woke culture
100%.
was clear, and
100%.
there was the tons of like messages fulfilled like Twitter and etc. And like everybody was like, you know, talking about that. And then Gemini had to say something like, yes, there was a couple of mistakes, but like that's how we train the model, so it's not the biases, yada yada yada. But there was the clear something wrong, right?
Most people don't ask generic questions. They frame the question based on their emotion. So the information coming back could be different based on how they frame the question.
There was also like that if you're there was also this messaging that if you're talking with even ChatGPT and you are asking ChatGPT to do something for you, you are framing your prompt and you're adding some like typical human-based words, like you're being nice to chat, for example, please now generate for me something something something, the outcome will be much different comparing to just robotic-ish prompt.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying, provide me this and that information. So the answer toward the like kind request going to be more kind-ish comparing to the other type of the request. So you essentially frame the outcome with your question and with your prompt.
We should test that sometime. We have different age groups in this room. We should all think of a question and ask it the way we want and see if it spits out the answer differently. That would be a good beta test.
That would be a great A/B test, and also I would test the different models. Like, you know, try it first with 4.0 and then 0.1 preview. Because 0.1 preview with this chain of thoughts, it's much more interesting to test, I'd say, especially when we're talking about some complex problems.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, so that was our first episode of the NanaTalks Podcast Roundtable. Thank you so much, folks, for joining me. I really hope that everyone enjoyed our conversation. Please let us know what do you think about that. And we will definitely gather one more time, at least one more time, and we're going to talk about other topics. If you would love to get our opinion on the topic, any topic which is interesting for you, please leave them in the comments and we will try to be as candid as possible. Because I do remember that Mark mentioned that like we can clearly and candidly share our opinions unless we do not have any clients. Well, since every one of us has something to do with the business and has clients and have to build those businesses, we will try to do our best to stay candid and to stay open and discuss and share solely our opinions and ideas and takes on all the topics you will find interesting. Thank you so much and stay tuned.